The last moment, the wind blew across the silent battlefield, carrying the smell of smoke and dust. The ground was littered with broken weapons and fallen bodies, both human and alien. Leora knelt on the cold dirt, tied tightly behind. Her back, the rough rope biting into her skin. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Every breath sharp with fear. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the distant sound of burning wreckage. In front of her stood a human soldier, tall and broad-shouldered. His armor scratched and stained from battle. His face was hidden behind a dark visor, but she could still feel his gaze on her. The barrel of his weapon was pointed straight at her chest. She closed her eyes, her body trembling. Her people had told her all her life what humans did to captives. Quick executions, no mercy. She thought this was the end. Her mind raced through memories, her mother's voice, telling her to stay away from the war. Her younger brother's laughter before the soldiers came, her father's last words before he was taken away. Now all of them were gone, and she was alone, and here she was, on her knees. Bracing for death by human hands, the soldier stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching against the rubble. The sound made her flinch. She waited for the trigger to pull. Her body tightened, waiting for the pain, but it never came. Instead, she heard the soft click of his weapon lowering. Her eyes opened slowly, confused. The soldier was still there, but the weapon now hung at his side. "You're safe now." His voice said through the helmet, calm and steady, "Safe." The word made no sense. No human ever spared an alien like her. She stared at him, unsure if it was a trick. Perhaps he wanted her to relax before killing her. Perhaps he would take her as a prisoner and make her suffer. But then, to her shock, he reached behind her and cut the ropes. The sudden freedom in her wrists almost felt unreal. Her hands moved slowly to the front, feeling the blood return to her fingers. "Get up," he said, his voice still calm. She hesitated, her legs weak. "Follow me if you want to live," he added. Glancing toward the burning horizon, Leora didn't move. Every instinct told her not to trust a human, but the way he spoke, it didn't sound like an order from an enemy. It sounded like a choice. She looked around. The battlefield was dangerous. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance she could hear the sounds of other soldiers. If she stayed here, she would be found by the wrong humans. If she ran the other way, she would walk into the wild zones full of beasts. And here in front of her was the man who had every chance to kill her, yet didn't. Her legs slowly pushed her up. She stood, still keeping a small distance from him. He turned and started walking through the ruins, glancing back to make sure she was behind him. She followed, though her eyes stayed alert, ready to run at any sign of betrayal. The path was dangerous, sharp metal, broken walls, and strange shadows moving in the smoke. They moved quietly. Leora tried to study him. His movements were careful but quick, as if he knew this land well, the way he scanned. The area wasn't like a predator. It was like someone protecting something, and that something was her. Every few minutes he stopped to check the surroundings. Once he raised his hand for her to stay still. She froze, and moments later, two other human soldiers passed nearby. Her heart raced. If they saw her, she would be dead. The soldier in front of her stayed completely still until the others were gone, then motioned for her to move again. Leora's mind was full of questions. Why had he spared her? What did he want from her? And most of all, could she actually trust him? They finally reached a collapsed building, its walls cracked but still standing enough to hide them. Inside, the air was cooler, the noise of the battlefield muffled. The soldier leaned his weapon against the wall and removed his helmet. For the first time, Leora saw his face, human, yes, but not cruel. His eyes were tired, but there was something in them she didn't expect. Kindness. "I'm Captain Elias," he said quietly. "You can stay here for now, but we have to move." Again before night, she didn't answer, still studying him. Her people always said humans had no mercy, but this one? This one had just saved her life. She didn't know it yet. But this was the moment her world began to change. The humans' choicest sun was sinking lower, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and red. From their hiding place inside the broken building, Leora watched Captain Elias check his equipment. Every move he made was careful, like a man who knew danger could come at any second. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice stayed calm. It was strange. She had seen humans on the battlefield, shouting and killing without mercy. But this one was different. Outside, the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the streets. The war wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before human patrols swept through this area again. Elias glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You can't stay here long," he said, tightening the strap on his armor. "If they find you, they won't hesitate." Leora's throat felt dry. "They?" She asked carefully. "My people," he replied, without looking at her. "They see you as the enemy. They see you as a target. If they find out, I spared you." "I'm done." The words made her tense. Why would he risk so much for her? He didn't know her name, her history, or whether she was dangerous. And yet, he was protecting her. It made no sense that night. He brought her food, a small packet of dried rations and a flask of water. She took them slowly, her hands trembling. Part of her wanted to throw the food away just to prove she didn't need a human's help. But her hunger was stronger than her pride. The first bite was dry, but she didn't stop eating. Elias watched her in silence, his eyes scanning the shadows outside the broken wall. When she was done, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you helping me?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down across from her, resting his weapon beside him. "Because once," he began slowly, "someone from your kind saved my sister's life." Leora blinked, unsure if she heard him right. "My people." "Yes," he said, his voice softer now. "She was just a child, trapped in a collapsed building. A soldier from your species dug her out, carried her to safety. He didn't have to. He could have left her, but he didn't, for a moment." Silence filled the room. Leora had never heard a human speak about her people that way. Most humans saw them as nothing more than enemies, and most of her people saw humans the same way. "Maybe I'm just paying back a debt," he said finally, before she could reply. Elias suddenly raised a hand, signaling her to be silent, his head tilted slightly, listening. Then she heard it. Footsteps approaching from outside, human voices getting closer. Her pulse quickened. She knew if they entered, they'd see her immediately, and then Elias would be exposed. Elias grabbed her arm gently, but firmly, and pulled her deeper into the shadows. "Stay quiet. Trust me," he whispered. She wanted to pull away, but his grip wasn't rough. It was steady, protective. The voices came closer through a crack in the wall. She saw two human soldiers in heavy armor walking past. They talked casually, unaware of the two figures hiding just a few meters away. Her breath caught in her throat. She prayed they wouldn't look inside. The soldiers passed, their footsteps fading into the distance. Leora let out a shaky breath. Elias didn't move until the silence returned. Only then did he release her arm. She stepped back, still trying to make sense of what just happened. He had hidden her, risked being caught, all for her that night. They stayed in the ruins. Leora lay against the cold wall, unable to sleep. Every sound outside made her tense. But she also kept thinking about the way he had shielded her from the other soldiers. It wasn't something an enemy would do. It wasn't something a killer would do. Before dawn, Elias woke her with a quiet nudge. "We move now," he said. She didn't argue. They slipped out of the building, moving through the narrow streets filled with rubble. The city felt like a maze of shadows and danger. Once, a loud crash in the distance made them stop. Elias motioned for her to wait while he scouted ahead. She watched him disappear into the smoke. For the first time, she felt a strange fear. Not of him, but for him. When he returned, his armor was dusted with ash, but his face was calm. "All clear," he said. They moved on, deeper into the ruins, and though the path was dangerous, Leora realized something. She was no longer following him because she had to. She was following him because she wanted to. The truth in the night was cold. The kind of cold that crept under the skin and stayed there. Leora sat near the broken wall of an abandoned storage room, her arms wrapped around her knees. Captain Elias sat a few steps away, cleaning his weapon by the faint light of a flickering lantern outside. The ruined city was silent, except for the distant crackle of fires still burning from the day's battles. Every now and then, a gust of wind carried the smell of ash and smoke inside. She hadn't spoken much since they left the last hiding place. Her mind was still full of questions. Elias was human, and humans were supposed to hate her kind. Yet he had risked everything, even fighting his own side, to keep her alive. She didn't understand why. Finally, she decided she needed answers. "Why did you really save me?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above the sound of the wind. Kalis didn't look at her right away. Instead, he kept working on his weapon. The metallic clicks echoing softly. "I already told you," he said after a pause. "Someone from your kind saved my sister once. I owe a debt." Leora shook her head. "That can't be the only reason. Humans don't risk their lives for debts." "Not in war." Elias's hands stopped moving. For a long moment, he stayed silent. Then he set his weapon aside and leaned back against the wall. "My sister was 10 years old," he began. "She was trapped under a collapsed building after a bombing. I was too far away to reach her. By the time I got there, she should have been gone." His eyes drifted away, as if he was seeing that day all over again. "But a soldier from your people dug her out. He carried her, bleeding and half-conscious, to the medics. And then he left. No reward, no thanks. He didn't even tell us his name. He just disappeared back into the chaos." Leora listened without interrupting. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. "That day," Elias continued, "I swore that if I ever had the chance to do the same, I would. War makes people forget that the other side has families too, that they have brothers, sisters, children." Before she could answer, a sudden noise outside made them both freeze. It was faint but clear, the sound of boots crunching on debris. Elias's hand went to his weapon instantly. He put a finger to his lips, motioning for her to stay silent. Leora's heart pounded in her ears. The sound grew louder, closer. Voices followed, low, tense, and speaking in a human language she barely understood. Elias moved closer to her, his eyes scanning the cracks in the wall. Through the gaps, she caught glimpses of 2 human soldiers moving cautiously down the street. They were searching. If they found this place, there would be no escape. Elias touched her arm gently, guiding her toward the darkest corner of the room. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The soldiers paused just outside, their shadows falling. Across the doorway, one of them stepped forward. Peering inside, Leora held her breath. Elias stayed perfectly still, Key's hand resting on his weapon, but not raising it yet. Seconds felt like hours. Then, after a brief scan, the soldiers moved, on their footsteps fading into the distance when the danger passed. Leora exhaled shakily. She turned to Elias, searching his face for some sign of fear. But there was none, only focus and readiness. "You could have let them find me," she said, almost accusingly. "I could have," he admitted, "but I didn't." Silence fell between them again. Leora looked down at her hands. She didn't want to admit it. But the more time she spent with him, the less he seemed like the monster she had imagined. The stories she had been told about humans were full of blood and cruelty. But this man, this captain, didn't fit any of them. Later that night, as the cold grew sharper, Elias noticed her shivering without a word. He shrugged off part of his thermal cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate. She stared at him, confused. "You'll freeze," she said. "I'll manage," he replied simply, wrapped in the borrowed cloak. She lay down against the wall. She could hear him keeping watch, his breathing steady. For the first time since the war began, she felt something she thought was impossible. Not safety, that was too much to hope for, but a small, fragile piece of trust, and it was all because of a human she had once believed would kill her. The escape, the first light of dawn, crept into the ruined streets. Leora rubbed her tired eyes, still wrapped in the thermal cloak Elias had given her. The night had been long, filled with the sound of distant gunfire and collapsing buildings. Now, the air was heavy with smoke and the sharp smell of burnt metal. Elias stood at the doorway, scanning the streets with careful eyes. "We can't stay here," he said in a low voice. "Patrols will sweep this area soon." Leora rose slowly, her legs still sore from days of running and hiding. "Where will we go?" she asked. "There's a safe zone," he replied, "but getting there won't be easy." They slipped out into the cold morning, moving through the narrow alleyways. The streets were empty at first, only the wind moving dust across the cracked pavement, but Leora could feel the danger in the air. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy. Every sound made her heart jump as they rounded a corner. A sudden mechanical hum filled the air. Elias froze, raising his hand for her to stop. Above them, a small black drone appeared from behind a ruined building, its red sensors scanning the ground. Leora's breath caught. She knew those drones. They didn't just report sightings. They eliminated threats instantly. Elias grabbed her wrist and pulled her into the remains of an old shop. "Stay low," he whispered. The drone hovered closer, its sensors sweeping the alley where they had been seconds ago. Elias kept one hand on his weapon, ready to fire if needed. But he knew shooting would draw more attention. The drone paused, scanning, then moved on, disappearing into the distance. That was close, Leora whispered, her voice trembling. Elias gave a quick nod. "Too close. We need to move faster." They pressed on, weaving through the maze of rubble and broken streets several times. Elias stopped to listen, his sharp instincts guiding them away from danger. But danger eventually found them from behind a crumbling wall. Two human soldiers stepped out, rifles aimed. "Halt!" One shouted. Leora froze, panic rising in her chest. Elias stepped in front of her, his weapon raised. "She's with me," he said firmly. The soldiers glanced at each other, confusion flickering across their faces. "With you." "That's an enemy," one shouted back. "Stand down, Captain, or will they never finished the threat." Elias moved first, firing two quick shots into the wall near their feet. The blast of dust and debris made the soldiers flinch, giving him enough time to grab Leora's arm and pull her into a side alley. They ran, boots pounding against the cracked concrete. Bullets tore through the air behind them, striking the walls. Leora's heart raced as they zigzagged through the debris. Every second, expecting a shot to find her, they reached a collapsed overpass. And Elias pushed her toward a gap just big enough to crawl through. "In," he ordered. She dropped to the ground, scrambling through the tight space. Elias followed, his armor scraping against the rubble. On the other side, they emerged into a sunlit courtyard surrounded by broken buildings. For a moment, it was quiet. Too quiet. A low growl broke the silence from the shadows. A massive beast stepped forward, its skin armored like stone, its teeth long and jagged. Leora froze in fear. It was one of the wild zone predators, drawn. To the noise of the chase, Elias stepped in front of her again. Raising his weapon, the beast lunged. 2 sharp blasts echoed in the courtyard. The creature fell with a heavy thud, dust rising around it. Elias turned to her, his face serious. "This is why you can't be out here alone," he said. She nodded slowly, realizing just how easily she could have died again. They didn't stop to rest. The sun was climbing higher. And with it came the risk of more patrols. Elias led her through an underground passage hidden beneath a collapsed bridge. The air inside was damp and smelled of rust. Water dripped from cracks above. Echoing in the darkness, they moved in silence until faint light appeared ahead. When they emerged, Leora saw the outline of distant hills. Beyond them, she could just make out a thin plume of smoke rising from what must be the safe zone, her chest filled with a strange mix of hope and fear. They were close, but not close enough. Elias stopped, scanning the horizon. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, lowering himself against a wall. Leora sat nearby, her legs aching from the run. For a while neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You didn't have to fight them back there." "Your own soldiers?" Elias looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't care what uniform someone wears. If they threaten someone I've sworn to protect, they're the enemy." She didn't know what to say for the first time. She began to think of Elias not as the human, but as something else entirely, something harder to define. And that thought stayed with her as they prepared to move again, deeper into danger. The sacrifice the hills ahead looked small from a distance, but every step toward them felt like a battle of its own. Leora's legs were heavy, each movement slower than the last. The sun burned high in the pale sky, and the heat pressed down on them like a weight. Elias kept his pace steady, scanning the ground for danger. He didn't speak much, but every now and then, he would glance back to make sure she was still following. By midday, they reached the edge of a cracked road. Beyond it stood a checkpoint, tall steel barricades, sandbags, and a half-dozen human soldiers armed and alert. Leora's stomach tightened. "They'll see me," she whispered, fear making her voice shake. Elias nodded, his face grim. "That's why we need a plan." They crouched behind a cluster of broken concrete blocks. From here, they could hear the soldiers talking and laughing, unaware of the 2 figures hidden just a short distance away. Elias studied the pattern of their movements, his eyes sharp and calculating. Finally, he turned to her. "You're going?" "To hide until I signal," he said. "I'll draw them away." "You run for that gap in the fence on the left." Her eyes widened. "No. If they catch you, they won't." He interrupted, his tone steady but firm. "Your life is worth the risk." Those words felt heavy in her chest. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her people, not even her own family during the war. The idea that a human, her supposed enemy, would risk himself for her was something she still couldn't fully understand. He led her to a shallow ditch hidden by tall weeds. "Stay low, no matter what you hear," he ordered. Then he stepped out into the open, walking straight toward the checkpoint. The soldiers noticed him instantly, their weapons raising in suspicion. "Captain Elias," one of them called. "What are you doing out here?" Elias approached calmly, keeping his hands visible. "I found signs of enemy movement," he said. "Needed to check the perimeter." The soldiers looked at each other, confused. "That's not your sector," another said, suspicion growing in his voice. Before they could question him further, Elias stepped closer, too close, forcing them to focus entirely on him. From her hiding spot, Leora watched, her heart pounding in her ears. Elias's body language was tense, his every move deliberate. Then one soldier suddenly shoved him. "What are you hiding, Captain?" When Elias didn't answer right away, the soldier swung a punch, hitting him hard in the side of the face. Leora's hands clenched, her body shaking with the urge to run to him. but his words echoed in her head. Stay low, no matter what. You hear? The soldiers kept their attention on Elias, their voices rising. One of them grabbed his arm. Demanding to know where he'd been, another pushed him to the ground. He took the blows without fighting back. His eyes flicking once toward the fence, her signal. Leora's body moved before her mind could catch up. She scrambled from the ditch, staying low, her feet silent against the dirt. The gap in the fence loomed closer. Her breath came fast, every heartbeat like thunder in her ears. Behind her, she could still hear the soldiers shouting at Elias. She slipped through the fence, landing hard on the other side, hidden now by the slope of the hill, but she didn't run. Something inside her refused to leave him there. She turned back, creeping along the edge of the fence until she could see the checkpoint again. Elias was still on the ground, one knee bent as if trying to get up. The soldiers stood over him, still questioning, still pushing. Her chest tightened. This was wrong. She couldn't let him take all the risk alone. Gathering her courage, she moved quietly toward the rear of the checkpoint. She spotted an unsecured supply crate and tipped it over. The loud crash made two soldiers whip around, giving Elias the distraction he needed in one swift motion. He shoved the nearest guard aside and grabbed his weapon. The sudden chaos sent the others scrambling. Elias didn't fire, he just used the weapon to keep them back while running for the fence. Leora met him halfway. He was breathing hard, his lip bleeding. But he was still moving fast, together. They slipped through the gap and into the cover of the hills. Shouts rang out behind them, but no one followed. By the time they stopped to catch their breath, the checkpoint was far behind. You were supposed to run, Elias said between breaths. I did, she replied, but I came back. For the first time since she met him, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Reckless, he muttered. But thank you. In that moment, Leora knew something had changed between them. The line between human and alien wasn't as sharp as it had been before. And though they were still far from the safe zone, they now moved forward, not as strangers, but as something closer, allies who would risk everything for each other. Between two worlds, they didn't stop walking until the sun dipped low and the hills cast long shadows across the land. Leora's legs ached, and every breath burned in her chest, but she kept moving. Elias was limping slightly from the blows he had taken at the checkpoint. His armor was scratched, and a dark bruise was already forming along his jaw. Even so, his eyes stayed sharp. Scanning the horizon for danger, they found shelter in the remains of an old stone watchtower, half collapsed but still standing enough to shield them from the wind. Inside, the air smelled of dust and age. Elias lowered himself against the wall. Breathing heavily, Leora sat nearby, watching him with quiet concern. You should rest, she said softly. I will, he replied. Removing his gauntlet to check a cut on his hand, she hesitated before speaking again. You risked your life for me. Twice today, Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. I told you before, he said. If someone's worth protecting, you protect them. Leora lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. No one in her life had ever said she was worth protecting, not even her own people during the war, for years. She had believed survival meant never relying on anyone else. Yet here she was, alive only because of a human. She moved closer, pulling a small cloth from her bag, the last thing she owned from her home. Let me see your face, she said. Elias raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. She gently pressed the cloth against the bruise on his jaw. He didn't flinch, though his eyes softened slightly. As the evening grew colder, she made a small fire. In the corner of the tower, using bits of broken wood, the flickering light cast shadows across the walls. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Leora broke the silence. What will happen when we reach this safe zone? Elias leaned back, thinking, they'll give you shelter, he said. And from there, choose your own path. She studied his face, trying to read the truth in his words. "You're not staying?" He shook his head. "My place is out here," he said. "There are others who need help." Something in her chest tightened at the thought. After everything, the idea of parting from him felt wrong. Before she could speak again, a sharp crack echoed outside. Both of them froze. Elias quickly doused the fire with dirt, plunging the tower into near darkness. He motioned for her to stay quiet and moved to the broken wall, peering out. In the fading light, he saw shapes moving along the ridge, at least 3 figures. Armed, they weren't human soldiers, and they weren't from her people either. Scavengers, the kind who preyed on the weak. Elias returned to her side, his voice low. "They're coming this way. Stay behind me." Her heart raced as the sound of footsteps drew nearer. The first scavenger appeared at the tower's entrance. A thin figure with glowing eyes and a cruel smile. "Look what we have here," he hissed. The others followed, their weapons drawn. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Leora and the intruders. "She's not yours to take," he said firmly. The scavengers laughed. "Everything out here is ours," one sneered. Lunging forward, Elias moved fast, striking the attacker with the butt of his weapon. The fight exploded in the cramped space. Elias fought with precision, his movements fueled by the need to protect her. Leora grabbed a broken piece of wood and swung it at one of the scavengers, trying to circle behind him. The blows sent the attacker stumbling back, giving Elias an opening to knock him down after a tense minute. The scavengers retreated, disappearing into the dark with curses. Elias's breathing was heavy, his stance still ready for more when he was sure they were gone. He lowered his weapon. Leora's hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. She had fought beside him, and together they had won. As the silence returned, she looked at him. "You said your place is out here," she said slowly. "Maybe mine is too." Elias studied her for a long moment. "Out here? It's dangerous." He said. "I know," she replied, "but it's where you are." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them dared to speak aloud. They were from 2 different worlds, yet somehow they were standing in the same one now. And as the night settled over the broken tower, Leora realized she no longer cared about the old stories she'd been told about humans, because this human had already rewritten them all. Changed forever, the morning sky was pale blue, streaked with thin clouds drifting slowly over the hills. Leora and Elias left the old watchtower before the sun had fully risen. The wind was cold but clean, carrying the smell of grass instead of smoke. For the first time in days, in the distance, beyond the last ridge, a cluster of small buildings marked the edge of the safe zone. It felt close enough to touch, yet far enough that anything could still go wrong. Elias walked ahead, his step steady despite his injuries. Leora followed a few paces behind, her eyes scanning the land the way he had taught her. Neither spoke much. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. 'Twas the silence of 2 people who had survived together. As they approached the final stretch, they came upon an old stone bridge. The river below was swollen from recent rains, its dark waters rushing fast. Halfway across, Elias stopped, raising a hand for her to pause. 2 human soldiers stood guard at the far end, rifles in hand. Leora's stomach twisted. "They'll stop us," she whispered. "They'll stop you," he corrected softly. "Unless I vouch for you." She looked at him, searching his face. "And if they don't believe you?" His jaw tightened. "Then I'll make them," he said simply. They crossed slowly, the boards of the bridge creaking under their weight. When they reached the soldiers, one stepped forward, eyeing Leora with open suspicion. "What's this?" he demanded. "She's under my protection," Elias replied firmly. The soldier frowned. "She's the enemy." "Not to me," Elias said, his voice calm but unyielding. The other soldier stepped closer, his hand drifting toward his weapon. "This isn't a refugee camp," he said. "You can't just bring." Elias moved a step forward, his gaze hardening. "She's not a prisoner, she's not a threat, and she's not your concern," he said. "You want to question someone? Question me." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Leora's heart raced. If they refused, she didn't know what Elias would do. But finally, the first soldier stepped aside with a scowl. "Fine," he muttered, "but she's your responsibility." "She always has been," Elias answered, leading her through. They walked into the safe zone, the rough dirt path giving way to small patches of green. The air here felt different, quieter, safer. Leora could see families moving between the buildings, children playing near the fences. It was the first time she had seen something like this since the war began. At the edge of the settlement, Elias stopped. "This is it," he said quietly. "You'll be safe here." Her chest tightened. "You're leaving," she said. Though she already knew the answer, he nodded. "There are others out there. People like you who need help." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Leora stepped closer, her voice soft. "I was told humans were only destroyers," she said. "I was told you had no mercy, no heart." Her eyes searched his. "But now?" "I know they were wrong," Elias smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "And I was told your people would never spare a human life," he said. "But my sister is alive because one of yours chose differently." The wind stirred between them, carrying the unspoken words they both felt. Leora reached out, taking his hand in hers. It was warm, steady. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't kill me. You gave me life." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "You did the same for me." He stepped back, letting go. "Stay safe, Leora," he said, turning toward the road beyond the settlement. She watched him go, each step carrying him further away. Part of her wanted to call out, to ask him to stay, but she didn't. She knew his path wasn't meant to end here. As his figure disappeared into the distance, she felt a strange mix of loss and hope. Her life was no longer what it had been. She was no longer the girl who knelt in the dirt, waiting for death. She was someone who had seen the truth that even in war, kindness could cross worlds. And somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the ruins, a human walked under the same sky. A human who had changed her forever. And she knew, without a doubt, that she had changed him too.